Welcome, dreamer. Let the stars guide us tonight, as an old lamplighter follows a silver feather into the hush between seconds. The story begins at twilight. In Dusk Wind, a town built on quiet hills where rooftops sloped like sleepy thoughts and the wind carried secrets in the ivy, there lived a man named Finley. He was the lamplighter, a gentle soul whose presence was like the hush between two notes of a lullaby. Each evening, as the sky wore its softest indigo, he emerged from his little stone cottage, wrapped in a coat the color of cooling ash. In his gloved hand, he carried a long iron rod with a round glass lantern at the end. Inside it danced a pale flame, silver-white, like the shimmer of a distant star on the surface of a lake. It was said to be a gift from the moon herself, handed down from one lamplighter to the next through quiet centuries. This light, strange and soft, had never gone out. Finley lit the lamps with care, tipping his rod gently so the flame would leap from lantern to lantern, like a whisper passed from dream to dream. Each copper lamp flickered awake with golden breath, casting halos over cobblestones and chimney smoke. Cats curled near doorsteps, children fell into sleep mid-sentence, and the wind grew still to listen. Only Thistle, the old gray dog with cloud-soft ears, followed Finley. She trotted faithfully at his side, her eyes full of calm knowing. Finley never spoke, and no one asked why. In Dusk Wind, some things were simply understood. But that night, as the first stars shivered awake, Finley noticed something unusual. Atop a lamppost near the baker's alley rested a single feather, long, silver, and faintly glowing. When he reached for it, it warmed his fingers. Thistle whined low. He looked skyward. Above the houses, beyond clouds, something moved, slow, graceful, silent as snow. That night, the final lamp remained unlit. Morning crept into Dusk Wind as though afraid to wake it. Mist hung in the alleys like a drowsy shawl, and the sun, hesitant and pale, stayed low behind the hills. In his cottage, Finley sat by a window, the silver feather resting on velvet cloth beside a cold cup of tea. He had not slept. The feather pulsed faintly, not in light, but in feeling, a hush that stirred the deep part of memory. Thistle lay curled by the hearth, her eyes barely open. Even she, dream-watcher that she was, seemed uncertain of the stillness hanging in the room. Finley reached for the feather and placed it inside his lantern. As it touched the old flame, the light changed. It did not grow brighter, only deeper. A silver-blue shimmer spread through the glass, like moonlight filtering through water. Without a word, Finley stood, wrapped himself in his long coat, and stepped into the mist. Thistle followed. They passed the bakery, its windows still dark. The fountain, where 3 mossy turtles dozed under ivy, whispered no song today. No one stirred. No one watched. The world, for the first time, seemed paused between breaths. At the town's edge stood the old iron gate, bent with time. Finley passed through it, leaving behind the last glow of any lamp. Beyond lay the open fields, blanketed in dew and mist, untouched. Above them, the sky shimmered. Not bright, but vast. A living canvas painted in soft motion. And from its heart, another feather fell, turning slowly, peacefully, as if drifting from a higher dream. Finley watched it descend. Then he walked toward the place it would land. Finley walked beneath a sky brushed with pearl and cloud silver, the lantern in his hand glowing with a shimmer not quite earthly. Each step he took was measured, as though he listened not to sound, but to silence, its shape, its mood, its memory. The fields beyond Duskwind lay covered in a low mist, curled like breath over sleeping grass. No path marked the way. There were no stones, no signs, only the sense of following something just out of sight. The second feather, still warm from its fall, rested now in Finley's pocket, its edges still lit with the quiet glimmer of whatever sky had sent it. Thistle padded ahead, nose to the wind, her tail swaying gently like a metronome of peace. Every few paces she paused, glancing back at Finley as though to ask if he could feel it too, that sense of being led not by light, but by longing. The further they walked, the softer the world became. Trees stood far apart, tall and silver-barked, their leaves pale as frost. Their branches did not rustle, but hummed faintly, as if remembering lullabies sung long ago. Between their trunks, the mist began to thin, and something new shimmered at the edge of sight. A structure, perhaps. Or a shape. As Finley drew closer, he saw it was a single stone arch, moss-grown and half-sunk into the earth. No walls. No door. Just the arch, standing alone as if waiting. On its curve, etched in weathered letters, were words he did not recognize, but they rang familiar in his bones. He stepped beneath the arch. The lantern's glow did not change, but the air did. It felt softer, thinner, as though the world had exhaled. Thistle hesitated, then followed. Ahead, beyond the arch, the mist parted like a curtain drawn slow, revealing a path of feathers stretching toward the horizon. The feathers led onward, one after another, as if scattered by a wind that knew where it was going. Each one lay upon the ground like a thought made visible, silver at the spine, white at the edges, pulsing faintly with a light that did not flicker. Finley followed them without question. Not with haste, but with the same quiet care he used when lighting the lamps of Duskwind. The world had changed behind the mossed arch. The trees here leaned inward, tall and pale, their leaves whispering in patterns no tongue could name. The mist had lifted, yet the air remained hushed, like the moment just before a lullaby begins. Finley's lantern glowed steadily, casting its silver warmth across the strange new path. Thistle stayed close now, no longer scouting ahead. Her ears twitched, and her steps fell in rhythm with Finley's. She, too, seemed aware that something old and listening stirred in the quiet all around them. At the base of one tree, Finley paused. A feather, larger than the rest, rested against a patch of moss, its surface etched with delicate swirling lines. When he bent to lift it, the lines shimmered, not with magic, but with memory. He did not understand what they meant, yet they felt known to him, like an old melody heard once in childhood. As they walked, the landscape began to soften. The grass turned to silvered moss. Stones shaped like stars peeked from the soil. And the sky above grew deeper in shade, neither day nor night, as though balanced on the edge of both. Then, at the crest of a low hill, the feathers stopped. Below, in a gentle hollow, stood a tall, curved gate made of pale wood, its frame entwined with sleeping vines. No hinges, no latch. Just stillness. Finley stepped closer. The lantern in his hand brightened, and the gate opened without a sound. Beyond the gate, the world unfolded into silence. It was not the silence of absence, but of listening, like the breathless hush between the fall of snowflakes. Finley stepped through first, lantern aglow, Thistle padding close behind. The silvered light reached only a little way ahead, but it was enough. They found themselves in a garden, though not one made by hands. The ground was soft with moss and moon blossoms, small white flowers that pulsed gently with light. Trees shaped like spirals arched overhead, their leaves strung like tiny bells that did not chime. In the center stood a pool, still as polished glass. Its surface reflected not just the sky above, but stars no longer present, constellations long gone from memory. Finley knelt beside it. The feathers had led him here, and the light in his lantern now flickered with expectancy. He did not speak, but he understood, this garden had waited. For him. Or perhaps, for anyone who remembered to follow wonder. He reached into the pool, not with his hand, but with the light. The lantern's glow touched the water, and at once, the surface stirred. Ripples bloomed outward, slow and glowing, and images began to appear. Not visions, exactly, but echoes. A child lighting his first candle. A hand held in farewell. A star seen through tears. Moments forgotten, but never truly gone. Behind him, Thistle sat perfectly still. Then, the surface stilled once more, and in its reflection, Finley saw not his face, but the shape of a bird with wings like woven light. The reflection lingered, not flickering, not changing. A bird unlike any creature of wind or field. It had no solid form, only feathers made of starlight, eyes deep as twilight, and wings arched like calligraphy. The Moonbird. Finley did not move. The lantern in his hand shimmered brighter, answering the image like an echo across water. He felt no fear, only a profound stillness that filled the space between his thoughts. The moonbird's gaze, though born of reflection, seemed to meet his. And then, slowly, it lifted from the pool, not in water, not in light, but in something between. A shape that was not there, yet entirely present. It circled the garden once, feathers drifting behind like threads of silver dawn. As it passed over Finley, the lantern flared, and 3 more feathers fell, one at his feet, one beside the pool, one into Thistle's waiting fur. The garden stirred. The flowers swayed. The bell leaves trembled faintly. Then the bird rose upward and vanished, not with sound, but with weightless stillness. Finley turned to the feathers. Each was marked, like the first, with symbols and curves that shimmered in a language older than words. He could not read them, but they spoke to something old in him. Something kind. Something true. He gathered the feathers, wrapped them in a cloth, and pressed his hand to the earth. The moss beneath his touch was warm. Behind him, the silver gate remained open. Ahead, Another path had formed, this time, one lit not by feathers, but by memory. The new path shimmered faintly beneath Finley's feet, winding like a ribbon through quiet woods. The lantern he carried glowed a little brighter now, as though the Moonbird had left behind not just feathers, but purpose. With each step, the light pulsed softly, revealing mossy stones, slow-growing flowers, and trees with bark like flowing script. The garden had faded behind him. The silver gate no longer stood in sight, and yet the air still carried its hush. Time here did not pass in minutes, but in feelings, in the spaces between wonder and remembering. Thistle trotted beside him, the 3 new feathers wrapped in cloth and tucked in his satchel. Her tail wagged faintly, ears twitching at some sound only she could hear. Perhaps the path sang to her. Or perhaps she, too, remembered something that had never happened but still felt true. As the woods deepened, Finley heard something, soft, clear, melodic. It was not a song sung aloud, but one that wove itself from memory and lantern light. A quiet hum. Notes that didn't need words. The lantern was singing. He paused. Around him, the world seemed to sway with the rhythm, leaves shifting, branches dipping. The light cast patterns across the path, shapes that rippled and danced, feathers, eyes, wings, stars. Finley closed his eyes. For a moment, he did not walk forward, but inward. Into a stillness where he saw the faces of those he had once known, perhaps in dreams, perhaps in another life. They were smiling. When he opened his eyes again, the song had faded, but something lingered. Ahead, a clearing bathed in silver light awaited. In the heart of the woods, where the moonlight gathered like dew, stood a structure not made of stone or wood, but of light held in shape. A silver pavilion, its beams faint as mist, its roof like folded wings. It shimmered without flicker, as though it existed in 2 worlds at once. Finley stepped into the clearing. The air here was cool and still, the kind of stillness that carries the weight of meaning. The pavilion had no door, yet he felt he must wait before entering, as though it was listening to him, as much as he to it. Thistle stopped beside him, nose lifted. The lantern's glow leaned forward, casting gentle rings along the pavilion's pale floor. And then, like a breath held too long, motion stirred inside. A figure stepped forward, not quite man, not quite creature. Tall, with robes like layered clouds and eyes that held constellations. It did not speak aloud, yet Finley heard its voice in the space between thoughts. "You carry the feathers," it said, not with sound, but presence. "You carry the light." Finley nodded once. The figure extended a hand, not to take, but to offer. In its palm lay a small spiral shell made of translucent crystal. "This will show you the sky beneath the sky," said the voice within him. "The memory of stars not yet born." Finley took the shell. It was warm. As he did, the pavilion pulsed with soft light, and the feathers in his satchel shimmered in answer. A choice awaited. The path was not yet done. The crystal shell pulsed faintly in Finley's hand, as if it contained a whisper too delicate to speak aloud. Its surface shimmered with swirling patterns, shapes that changed when held still, like reflections seen through rippling water. As he turned it slowly, a glow began to rise from within, soft as moon breath, steady as a heartbeat. Thistle watched, ears tilted forward, her tail brushing the moss in slow arcs. Then, as the light from the shell deepened, the world around them shifted. The trees swayed but did not bend. The pavilion remained, though dimmed. And the sky above grew wider, its blue deepening to something older, something behind the stars. Finley looked upward. There, above the clearing, a second sky revealed itself. Not as a dome or ceiling, but as a reflection, vast and upside down. Beneath this mirrored sky, other stars gleamed, ones not yet born, and constellations shaped like stories instead of beasts. Feathers drifted there, and time itself seemed to move in spirals. He could see the memory of lanterns yet to be lit. Cities that hadn't been built. Paths that might one day be walked by someone who still didn't know their own name. And then, gently, he felt it. A pull. Not of weight, but of welcome. The crystal shell in his hand had become transparent, and within it now fluttered a single, perfect feather, glowing from within, as though waiting to be placed somewhere meaningful. Finley breathed in the quiet. He understood now. This journey was not only about following the Moonbird. It was about carrying its memory back. The mirrored sky above shimmered once more, then folded itself away, like a curtain gently drawn. The light around Finley softened, and the woods returned, familiar again but changed, tinged with a deeper silence, a stillness lined with wonder. The feather within the crystal shell glowed softly, not with urgency, but with invitation. Finley looked to Thistle. Her gaze was steady, as if she had known all along where the path would lead. She took a single step forward, then sat again, waiting. Always waiting with patience that seemed older than time. From the folds of his coat, Finley brought out the first silver feather, the one found atop the lamp in dusk wind. Then the others. One by one, he laid them in the moss before him, forming a crescent shape that shimmered faintly. He placed the crystal shell in the center. The feathers lifted. Slowly, soundlessly, they rose into the air, spinning together in a graceful arc, their light forming a circle, then a spiral, then something like a seed. The pavilion's glow brightened once more. And then, from somewhere behind and within, Finley heard the voice again, not words, not music, but the hush of meaning. "Will you carry it back?" it asked. "Will you light the way for those who walk in shadow, with a light not your own, but remembered?" Finley bowed his head, not in answer, but in understanding. The feathers fell once more, softly, gently, into the lantern he still held. And now the flame inside shone with the color of starlight just before dawn. The journey back was not marked by feathers or gates, but by something quieter, certainty. The path did not unfold with light or music. It simply was, waiting like a page already written. Finley walked without doubt, the lantern in his hand glowing with a light deeper than before. Not brighter, but steadier. Within it, the feathers now floated like embers in a still wind, their glow forming a rhythm older than thought. Thistle walked close beside him, her paws falling in time with the soft swish of grass. There was no hurry in their steps. Time here had slowed to the pace of breath, to the quiet between one heartbeat and the next. As they passed through the forest's edge, the world grew more familiar. Duskwind shapes returned, rooftops leaning into each other, chimney smoke rising in curls, shutters half open like eyes just waking. Morning had not yet arrived, but the sky was thinking about it. Finley stepped through the old gate, which gave its usual sigh of hinges, and made his way toward the square. No one stirred. The lamps, unlit since the evening he had left, stood in silence. Empty. Waiting. He moved to the first. Lifted the lantern. And gently, with no rush, tipped it forward. The new flame, soft as memory, silver as breath, caught the wick and bloomed. It was not the old light. It was something gentler. Wiser. He moved on, and the lamps lit in sequence, each one catching the new fire as though it had always belonged to them. The town, still asleep, glowed quietly beneath the weight of returning light. The final lamp, the one he had left unlit before, now welcomed the flame with a quiet sigh. And somewhere far above, a wing passed silently across the stars. Days passed. Then weeks. And the rhythm of duskwind returned, slow and kind, like ripples on a quiet pond. The townsfolk never asked where Finley had gone. In their hearts, they knew. Some stories are not told in words but in the feeling that lingers when a lantern is lit just before dawn. The children noticed first that the lamps were different. Not in shape, but in warmth. The light now held stories. Some nights, if one stood very still beneath them, one might hear the rustle of feathers, or the hush of wind over forgotten hills. Finley remained as he always was, quiet, steady, soft in step. But there was a new light behind his eyes, the kind that comes from seeing things not meant to be remembered, yet remembered anyway. Thistle grew slower with the seasons, but she stayed at his side, her gaze ever watchful, ever knowing. And the flame in the lantern never dimmed. It flickered sometimes, as if dreaming, but it never failed. On certain nights, when the clouds parted and the stars whispered, Finley would pause by the final lamp, the one at the edge of town, and lift his lantern toward the sky. Just for a moment. Not to signal, but to say, I remember. And far beyond, where time folds like a blanket and light takes its rest, the moonbird circled once more, its wings catching the light from a single flame, carried home in quiet hands. Duskwind slept peacefully beneath it, wrapped in a glow that was not only light, but memory. In a quiet house wrapped in vines, mirrors remember what hearts forget. One boy enters, and the past begins to whisper. At the edge of a slow green hill, wrapped in a robe of ivy and long swaying willows, stood a house that had not been lived in for many years. Its shutters blinked sleepily in the wind, and its windows, though dusk dimmed, held a soft sort of glow, like a lantern left for someone returning. The townsfolk called it the Willow House. Not haunted. Not forgotten. Just, waiting. When Corwin arrived, the house did not creak or groan, as empty houses often do. It simply opened its arms and let him step inside. He was a quiet boy with eyes like dusk and a satchel of books that had not been read in a long while. He had come because the house had been left to him by an aunt he barely remembered, someone who had once braided his hair and told him stories shaped like clouds. The air inside was cool, but not cold. It smelled of time, of cedar wood and rain-damp pages. The hallway was lined with mirrors, some oval, some square, all with frames of driftwood and tarnished brass. They didn't reflect the room exactly. Or him. Not quite. He paused before one, a small, round mirror by the staircase. His reflection blinked. But Corwin had not. He stepped back. The mirror returned to stillness. Thistle, the old orange cat from the neighborhood, had slipped in behind him and now wound her way between his ankles, purring as if she, too, had been waiting. He said nothing, only reached out and touched the cool glass. The house exhaled. A soft sound, like wind through feathers. And upstairs, in the locked room that hadn't opened in years, another mirror shimmered softly in the dark. The next morning dawned misty and blue, as though the sky itself had wandered too far into dream. The house, wrapped in willow shadows, remained still. Only the creak of branches and the occasional mew from Thistle stirred the quiet. Corwin moved through the halls in slow steps, running his fingers along the wallpaper, faded florals, soft as old breath. The mirrors watched him as he passed, each reflecting the world a little differently. In one, his eyes looked older. In another, he held a candle he had never touched. One showed the cat curled beside a second figure asleep in a chair. But the rooms were empty. Only the mirror remembered. It was on the third morning, just after tea, that Corwin found the key. It lay inside a teacup in the kitchen, no note, no rust, no reason to be there. Small, silver, and cold to the touch. He knew where it belonged. The locked room at the end of the upstairs hall had always seemed part of the house's breath, present, waiting, never rushed. He climbed the stairs, key in hand, and paused before the door. The mirrors on the wall seemed to lean in ever so slightly, as though listening. The key turned without resistance. The door opened to a room with no dust. The air inside was clear and still, as if it had been protected, not abandoned. There was only one object, a tall, arched mirror with a willow-carved frame. It stood alone in the center of the room, untouched by time. Corwin stepped forward. His reflection smiled at him. But he had not smiled. Corwin stared at the mirror, his breath stilling as the version of himself within it smiled again. Not wide, not unkind, just a soft curve of the lips, as if remembering something sweet. Yet Corwin's own face remained unchanged, his hands resting quietly at his sides. The room around him held its hush. No ticking clock, no floorboard creaks, only the soft, pulsing awareness of being seen. He took one step closer. The mirror did not ripple, did not fog. But something in the air shifted, like the way a room feels when someone leaves and then returns, and everything slightly warmer. In the reflection, the willow-carved frame seemed to shimmer. Beyond his mirrored self, the room looked the same, and yet, not quite. The wallpaper and the reflection had more color. The light was softer. And on the windowsill sat a pair of teacups. Corwin reached out again, fingers brushing the cool glass. And the mirror accepted his touch. His fingers didn't stop at the surface, they passed through. Not in the way water parts or fog yields, but more like stepping into a memory. Thistle, who had been watching from the hallway, gave a low meow. She didn't enter, but sat like a sentinel in the doorway. Corwin took a breath that didn't feel like his and stepped forward. The world blinked. And he was inside. But the room he stood in was no longer quite the same. The wallpaper had brightened. The teacups now held steam. The reflection, his reflection, was gone. Only Corwin remained. And he was no longer certain which side of the glass he stood on. The light here was dream-soft, dappled with pale gold, as if filtered through clouds shaped like lullabies. Outside the window, the willows swayed slower than wind could explain, their long green arms reaching down like fingers brushing the earth in thought. Corwin turned in slow wonder, his hands brushing the back of a velvet chair that hadn't been in the room before. Everything here felt familiar in the way dreams do, recognizable yet unplaceable, warm with a memory he hadn't made. On the small table by the window sat a book. Leather-bound, its spine cracked with kindness, not wear. He opened it. The pages were filled with mirrors. Not drawings of them, but tiny images, each one reflecting something that wasn't in the room. A girl with braids lighting candles in a hall of stars, an old man sleeping beneath a tree that bloomed in the moonlight, a child chasing fireflies into a forest of glass. They moved slowly, like distant memories being remembered in real time. Thistle appeared beside him, not in the doorway this time, but curled on the windowsill. In this version of the world, her fur was brighter, her eyes wide and young. She purred once, and the mirror behind Corwin shimmered faintly. He looked into it again, but now, he saw another version of himself. This one older, seated in a garden of lanterns, hands folded in his lap, smiling as though he'd lived every dream in the book. Corwin closed it gently. And the air seemed to hum. As if the house itself was pleased. Corwin wandered back through the mirrored hallway, but now each frame shimmered faintly, as if acknowledging him. The glass in them no longer simply reflected the room behind, they showed flickers of moments. Some familiar. Others, not yet lived. In one, he saw himself much younger, curled beside a fireplace with his aunt, her face glowing in the firelight, reading aloud from a book bound in deep green. In another, he stood older, leaning out a window watching rain fall on a garden full of glowing lanterns, a cat on his shoulder. None of these scenes had happened. Not truly. Yet they tugged at something in him with the soft persistence of memory. He paused before a long mirror framed in willow branches, the leaves carved so delicately they looked real. This time, the glass showed not him, but the very hallway he stood in, though slightly changed. In the reflection, candlelight flickered along the walls. A vase of fresh lilies stood on a table that no longer existed. And walking slowly through the corridor in the mirrored world, was his aunt. She turned her head. And met his gaze. Corwin stepped back. The hallway behind him was empty, but in the mirror, she continued walking. Calm. Kind-eyed. She did not speak, but the look she gave was filled with warmth. As she passed beyond the edge of the frame, the mirror returned to stillness. But Corwin felt changed. He now understood, the mirrors were not just showing him things. They were inviting him to remember, not with the mind, but with the heart. And somewhere above, the attic creaked softly, as if something else had begun to stir. That night, sleep came to Corwin gently, like a hand brushing the brow. The bed in the Willow house was soft with quilts that smelled of lavender and wood smoke. Thistle slept beside him, a warm, purring presence. And the house, with all its echoes and sighs, wrapped itself around him like a lullaby made of timber and time. In the dream, he stood at the base of a spiral staircase that hadn't existed before. It wound upward, tight and slender, into the attic space above the house. Light poured down from the top, silver and soft, like moonlight filtered through memory. He climbed. The attic was round, domed like an observatory, but instead of stars, it was filled with mirrors. Dozens of them, all different sizes and shapes, forming a great circle. And in the very center, a single chair. Empty. As he stepped into the circle, the mirrors shimmered. Each one showed a different version of the same room, but in one, the chair held a child asleep with a book. In another, an old man humming. In a third, Corwin himself, seated quietly, watching the night through a skylight. And then the real skylight above him opened, just a sliver, and starlight spilled in. The mirrors caught it, reflected it, wove it, until the attic glowed with constellations that shifted as Corwin breathed. He sat in the chair, and the mirrors turned slowly inward, not trapping him, but embracing him. Seated in the attic chair, surrounded by the circle of mirrors, Corwin felt no fear. Only stillness. The house hummed quietly around him, a sound more felt than heard, like the silence just before a page is turned. The mirrors did not rush to speak. They moved slowly, turning as if stirred by breath or thought. Each one now showed not places, but moments, shards of time held gently, like dew on a spider's thread. In one mirror, a birthday long forgotten, Corwin at 7, wearing a paper crown, smiling at a cake topped with crooked candles. In another, a future not yet real, Corwin, older, placing fresh-cut willow branches in a vase beside the fireplace. In another, simply the present, this attic, this chair, his hands folded in his lap. The reflections swayed like lullabies, and he began to understand, this room was not a place. It was a memory made solid. A space between time's forward pull, where all his lives, dreamed, lived, imagined, gathered like fireflies. Thistle appeared at his feet, stretching before curling into a soft circle. Her fur shimmered faintly under the starlight streaming in through the skylight. Then the central mirror, the one directly across from him, began to glow. Slowly, an image formed, not of Corwin, but of his aunt. Seated in the same chair. Her hands rested exactly as his did now. She smiled. not at him, but through him. And he realized, this was not her memory. It was his. When Corwin finally stood, the attic did not resist. The light dimmed with him, and the mirrors softened their glow. Thistle followed, tail swishing softly. He walked down the spiral staircase, not with haste, but with the quiet knowledge that something had shifted within him. Back in the hallway, the mirrors had changed. Not in appearance, but in silence. They no longer shimmered with mystery. Instead, they seemed content. As though each had offered what it needed to, and now waited only to be acknowledged, not solved. He moved from frame to frame, placing his fingers lightly on the wood, whispering thanks. The mirrors did not respond, but the house itself seemed to exhale, a long, slow breath from floorboards to beams. In the sitting room, he found a new book placed on the table. Its cover was willow green, and no title graced its spine. When he opened it, he found it blank. Every page empty, save the faint scent of cedar. A pen lay beside it. Corwin understood without words, the house remembered him now. And he, in turn, could choose what memories to leave behind. He sat. Wrote a single line on the first page. It read, "This house was waiting for me, even before I knew how to return." As he closed the book, the room grew warmer. Outside, the willows rustled gently. The day had not ended. It had only deepened. And the mirrors no longer held reflections of the past. They waited quietly for what he would become. In the days that followed, Corwin stayed within the Willow house, letting the hours drift like leaves on a pond. He did not mark them. The mirrors had taught him that time, once folded, was softer when left unnamed. Each morning he sat beside the green-covered book, tracing the spine before writing a line or two. Not stories, not plans, just small truths. The light in the east room turns blue when I hum. Or, the mirror by the stairs shows my thoughts, not my face. The house responded in gentle ways. A new cup appeared when tea was needed. Rain fell only when he was ready for it. The wind whispered through the willows in rhythm with his breath. He began to see the house not as an empty place, but a companion. It remembered his aunt not only in scent and shade, but in feeling. Her laughter echoed softly in corners. Her footsteps seemed to pass now and then through the kitchen, never startling, only reminding. One afternoon, as the sun brushed gold along the window panes, Corwin stood before the mirror in the upstairs hall, the one that had first blinked at him. He looked into it now without fear. His reflection blinked in time with him. And then, slowly, it smiled. His own smile. His own face. He reached out, touched the glass, and this time, it was simply cool. A mirror again. He understood now, the house had offered a place to look inward, not to escape. It had held his echoes gently, until he was ready to hear them. And now, it was listening still. Waiting for what he would choose to remember next. That evening, as the sky turned to velvet and moths tapped gently on the window glass, Corwin sat in the library, a room he hadn't noticed before. It smelled of violets and dust, and the books along the walls were worn with loving use. Not a single title repeated. Some had no titles at all. He sat in a wingback chair and let the stillness wrap around him. Then, from a drawer in the side table, he found an envelope. Unsealed. Cream-colored. His name, written in a hand he had not seen since he was small. He opened it slowly. "Dear Corwin," it began. "This house remembers, as I hope you will. Mirrors can frighten us when we forget who we are. But they can also guide us home, when we're ready to look kindly at what we find." There was no signature. Just a pressed sprig of willow leaf folded inside. He held it for a long time. Then slipped the letter into the green book on the first page, where his line already waited. The house gave a long sigh through its beams. Thistle jumped onto the windowsill and stared into the fading sky. Her eyes followed something unseen. Corwin watched with her. And in the distance, the willow branches parted in the breeze, revealing the moon rising, silver and slow. Tomorrow, he thought, perhaps he would walk beyond the hill. But not yet. Not tonight. The mirrors had told enough stories for now. The next morning arrived on quiet feet, stepping through the house in beams of pale gold. Corwin woke to the sound of leaves brushing against glass, and a silence that held no weight, only peace. He made tea in the kitchen, now familiar, and carried it to the window seat in the back room he had not yet explored. There, beyond the wide glass panes, lay a garden he hadn't noticed before. It curled behind the house like a secret kept gently, blooming with pale blue flowers and tiny silver ferns. The willows bowed low above it, their branches draping like lace over the path. He stepped outside with bare feet, feeling the dew kiss his skin. The garden welcomed him, though no gate had opened. It had always been part of the house, waiting to be seen. At the garden center stood a stone bench, smooth with age. Beside it, a mirror rested on a frame of twisted branches, half covered in vines. This mirror reflected not his face, but the sky, clouds drifting, light changing. He sat. And for a long while, did nothing. It was the first time in his life he'd done so without feeling he should be elsewhere. Thistle joined him, curling beneath the bench with a sigh. And for the first time, Corwin realized the house no longer felt like someone else's. It felt like home. Not because he owned it, but because he belonged within it. That evening, before the stars arrived, Corwin lit a small lamp in the upstairs hall. The mirrors glowed softly in its light, and their reflections shimmered not with mystery, but with calm. Each showed him as he was, nothing hidden, nothing added. Only a boy becoming something quiet and steady. He passed by them with a gentle touch on the frame of each one. At the end of the hallway, he paused at the tall mirror, the first that had blinked. It did not shimmer now. It simply waited. He placed his palm against the glass, and in the reflection, the house stood whole behind him. The willows whispered. A book lay open on a desk below. A cat blinked lazily in a beam of light. Corwin smiled. The mirror smiled back. He turned away, the last page of evening closing gently around him. Later, as he drifted into sleep beneath a patchwork quilt that smelled of cedar and old laughter, the house exhaled through its walls, its doors, its floorboards. A long, slow sigh of contentment. It no longer waited. It remembered. Outside, the moon passed through the willow branches in silver silence. And in the attic, among the mirrors, a single empty chair faced the stars. Waiting, always, for the next story to begin. At the forest's edge, a carousel waits. Its music stirs, and carved creatures begin to dream. There is a place where the forest thins, where the trees grow shy and begin to step back, as if afraid to disturb what lies beyond. The air grows still there, thick with the scent of moss and old secrets, and the sky opens just enough to let the light fall in crooked shafts. In that quiet hollow, hidden beyond the edges of old maps and deeper than any path should lead, stood a carousel. It was not broken, though it had not turned in years. Its colors had faded to the hues of twilight, pale lavender, dusky rose, the gray-blue of early evening clouds. Vines curled along the golden poles. The wooden creatures, painted deer, swans, foxes, even a lion with closed eyes, stood perfectly still, as if pausing between breaths. No one remembered who built it. No one remembered who last wrote it. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right, a soft melody drifted through the trees. A tune like lullabies hummed underwater, or music boxes left open too long. Ansel was the first to find it in years. She wasn't looking, not truly. She had wandered past the last fence post, past the blackberry thickets, past where the stones stopped whispering directions. Her boots were worn. Her eyes were thoughtful and quiet. She had come to the forest not to find something, but to feel small enough to hear again. And the carousel waited, wrapped in shadow and wildflowers. As Ansel stepped into the clearing, the music stopped. And the lion opened one eye. Ansel froze. The lion's eye was not painted, it gleamed, golden and alive, catching the late light like a coin half buried in sand. But it did not blink again. It remained still, as though winking once was all it was allowed. Around her, the clearing held its breath. The air felt dense with waiting, as if something old had just stirred and then gone still again. She stepped carefully between tufts of moss and forget-me-nots, drawing nearer to the carousel. It loomed like a dream half-remembered, its faded colors soft and sweet, like the sky just after a storm has forgotten how to cry. Time had passed here, but not in the usual way. It hadn't worn the carousel down, it had merely wrapped around it like a blanket left undisturbed. Up close, the wooden creatures were even stranger. The fox had glass beads for eyes that seemed to watch her with curiosity. The swan had silver keys tucked beneath one wing, as if it guarded doors no one else could see. The deer, with its soft-looking coat and feathered antlers, stood mid-step, as though ready to leap into another dream. Ansel reached out and touched the pole beside the swan. It was warm, not like metal warmed by sun, but like something alive. Something that remembered being touched. And then, from deep within the carousel, the music began. First a single note, long and low. Then another, higher. Then more, weaving together in a lullaby made of chimes and bells and breath. The melody curled around her like a vine, slow and steady, as if it had been waiting all this time for someone to listen again. The carousel did not turn. But the creatures sighed. Not with breath, but with wood and wheel and memory. Ansel sat upon the edge of the swan's saddle, not to ride, but to be near the sound. Her eyes softened. Her thoughts quieted. She had not heard music like this before. But her heart knew every note. The melody grew richer as Ansel sat there, the notes winding through the clearing like mist curling around her ankles. The air shimmered faintly with each rising chord, and something in her chest eased, as if a knot she hadn't noticed had begun to loosen. Then, without a sound, the carousel began to move. It did not groan or creak. Its base turned in a circle slow as moonrise, smooth as a whispered promise. The creatures did not jolt or shift, they floated, gliding along their track as though they had never stopped, as though time had only paused to catch its breath. The swan carried Ansel gently forward, past the deer, past the lion with its sleeping eye, past a wolf with stars painted into its fur. She did not hold on. There was no need. The motion was as safe as a lullaby, and softer than sleep. Around and around they turned, once, then twice. And on the third circle, she saw it. Beyond the clearing, just for a moment, stood a child. A small figure in the trees, barely more than a shadow against the green. They stood barefoot, with a paper crown on their head and a stuffed rabbit in their arms. The child did not move, only watched the carousel with eyes wide as rain pools. When Ansel turned to look again, they were gone. The music continued, unbothered. The swan rose slightly on its golden pole, then sank again with the rhythm of an unseen tide. As Ansel rode, she began to feel not like a visitor, but like someone returning to something long left behind. The carousel was not a place to escape from the world. It was a place where the forgotten pieces waited to be found. And tonight, they had begun to stir. The carousel slowed after its third full circle, the music thinning to a hush of wind chimes and sighs. The swan settled gently, its carved wings folding in ever so slightly, as if it too had breathed in the memory of motion. Ansel remained seated, unmoving, eyes half-lidded in the golden dusk. The quiet felt different now, not empty, but filled with attention. As though the clearing itself was listening. Then came a sound, not quite words, not quite wind. A soft voice, gentle as the flutter of moth wings. "She's come," it said. Ansel turned, but no one stood beside her. Only the carousel creatures, silent and still. Then, "She's listening." The voice was not from a single place, but everywhere. It wrapped itself around the air like ribbon. The carved deer, its feathered antlers catching the last light, blinked once, just once. Its glassy eyes met hers for the briefest moment. "She's here to remember," murmured the fox, its mouth unmoving, yet the words clear in her chest. Ansel slid off the swan's back, her boots landing softly in the moss that lined the base of the platform. She turned slowly, eyes wide, heart open. None of the creatures moved again. But the air shimmered, and in that shimmer, she felt them, not as statues, but as dreamers. They were not awake. Not quite. But they were close. She could hear their breath in the rhythm of the wind, the creak of the trees, the soft tap of leaves falling in distant corners of the forest. "Do you remember the stories?" whispered the lion's voice, ancient and low, like the crackle of a far-off fire. Ansel did not answer aloud. But her eyes filled. Because suddenly, she did. Not the details, not yet, but the feeling of being told, of sitting curled beneath blankets, of voices soft with sleep. The carousel hadn't been waiting to be found. It had been waiting to be remembered. The music began again, this time softer, more delicate, like a melody played on petals. The air shimmered faintly, and a single breath of wind curled through the clearing, stirring Ansel's coat and the tips of the carved creature's ears. Then, with no visible movement, the swan's eyes glowed faintly silver. The golden pole that held it shimmered, and from beneath the carved saddle, a soft mist unfurled, like memory made visible. Ansel stepped back as the mist took shape in the air above the swan, curling upward like ink in water. It became a vision, soft-edged, not sharp like a mirror but gentle like a dream half-remembered at dawn. She saw a wide lake beneath a sky of endless dusk. A single swan glided across it, its wings never touching the water, its reflection trailing behind like stardust. The lake rippled only when the swan sang, and where the ripples reached the shore, wildflowers bloomed in blue and violet and white. Ansel stood still, eyes wide, heart quiet. She understood without needing explanation. This was the swan's story. Not a tale of action, but of being, of remembering the song that shaped the world around it. The swan didn't need to change or run or battle shadows. It simply existed, gracefully, peacefully. And its song, when sung gently into the air, helped the world remember how to dream. The vision faded slowly, folding back into mist. The swan's silver eyes dimmed. The music softened, then stilled. Ansel touched the side of the swan once more, her hand lingering. "Thank you," she whispered, though no words had been exchanged. One creature had dreamed. And more were waiting. The swan stood still once more, its feathers quiet in the glow of late evening. The music paused, just for a moment, as if the carousel itself had taken a breath. And then it shifted. A soft rustling began, like leaves whispering to each other, followed by a delicate tinkling sound, small bells or distant chimes. The carved fox, curled at the edge of the carousel's turn, opened one eye. Its tail, ending in a spiraled vine, twitched once, and the world hushed. Mist unfurled again, curling upward in coils of green and gold. The music returned in a new shape, sly and clever, light-footed and curious, like paw prints pressed into soft earth. From the mist, a forest bloomed. Ansel watched as trees stretched upward, their trunks striped with moss and morning. Beneath their branches moved a fox, not the wooden one from the carousel, but a living echo of it, quick and quiet, its paws stirring wildflowers as it moved. This fox carried something in its mouth, a seed wrapped in silk. It paused beneath an old tree with bark like cracked porcelain. Digging gently, it buried the seed, then stepped back and waited. The wind passed overhead. The sky shifted colors. And from the earth, a vine grew. Not fast. Not slow. It coiled upward, flowering in soft bells of silver and blue. When it reached the low branches above, the tree shimmered, and where there was once silence, a song began to hum, not from the fox, but from the vine itself. The song wrapped around the forest, and the forest listened. It was not a tale of mischief, as many think foxes tell. It was a story of quiet planting, of secrets given to the soil. The fox in the vision closed its eyes and curled beneath the singing vine, content. And as the mist faded, the carousel's fox stilled once more. Ansel reached out and touched its back. She said nothing. But the creature's story had already been heard. The fox's tail faded like the last ember of a quiet fire, and the music slipped into stillness once again. The carousel did not turn. The trees held their breath. Even the sky, dusted now with the first soft stars, seemed to pause and wait. Ansel turned slowly toward the lion. He was the largest of all the carousel creatures, broad-shouldered, deep-chested, his mane carved in swirls of gold and copper. One eye, forever half-lidded, gleamed in the growing dusk. He had not moved. Not since the first blink. But now, the golden glow of his gaze returned, steady and slow, like dawn pressing through the edges of a storm. A low hum rose in the air, not music, not voice, but something older. The mist that bloomed around the lion was darker, heavier. It spilled out in waves of amber and ochre, like old sunlight trapped in stone. From within, the shape of a desert appeared, not barren, but vast and golden. A land of dunes and silence, of sky stretched so wide it seemed to cradle the world. And there, atop a hill of sun-warmed sand, sat the lion, not carved, not wooden, but living, grand, and still. Around him lay a circle of glowing orbs, each one flickering like a tiny lantern. Ansel felt their warmth even from where she stood. The lion did not roar, did not run. He simply watched. He was the keeper of the last light, the final spark at the edge of day, the moment when everything could become shadow, or become story. He watched until the sun dipped low, and then, gently, he passed a single flame to the stars. That was his task. To guard the light until it was time to give it away. And so he did. The vision faded like twilight does, not all at once, but with gentleness. The golden mist withdrew. The lion's eye closed once more. And Ansel, with both hands, touched the smooth edge of his mane, bowing her head, not from fear, but from reverence. He had held the light. And now, part of it lived in her. The lion's tail folded gently into quiet, and the music faded to a single, lingering note, so thin it felt more like a thread of silver air than sound. The clearing had grown dim, painted in shades of dusk, and the carousel now turned no longer. It waited. Ansel turned to the deer. Its body was slender and strong, carved in smooth arcs and poised with stillness. Its antlers stretched tall, not bone, but feather, soft-plumed and wind-swept, catching the last light like frost catching fire. Its eyes were closed. Until now. They opened slowly, gaze steady and deep, not fierce but boundless, like the quiet heart of a forest that has forgotten time. And from the base of the carousel, a hush of wind stirred, not cold, but old. It carried scents Ansel couldn't name, things lost between tree bark and root, rain before it falls, moss before it wakes, memories that grow without words. The mist this time was pale green and gold, drifting upward like breath. And from it, a glade unfolded, not built, not planted, but grown from dream. In its center stood the deer, real and wild, crowned in feather and shadow. It did not speak. It simply listened. Around it, the forest moved with slow rhythm. Leaves turned with intention. Streams curved to greet it. Birds did not sing, they whispered. Because the deer remembered the world before noise. It had walked paths that had never been mapped, and heard stories not told in language, but in rustling and river and root. And when the wind passed through its feathers, the air itself seemed to sigh. Ansel closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt it, the stillness of the oldest forest. Not silence, but presence. Not knowing, but being known. The vision faded as gently as a leaf settling onto water. The deer's eyes closed. And Ansel stood very still, her hand resting just above its heart. She did not need to speak. The forest had already heard her. The deer's dream faded like a breath released, its eyes now closed once more, its antlers still crowned with stillness. Around the edge of the carousel, the mist curled away, returning to root and leaf and shadow. The air was soft again, but no longer expectant, it had begun to settle. Ansel stood in the stillness, her heart quiet, her hands loose at her sides. The clearing no longer felt like a secret place, but like something long known. She looked around at the creatures, the swan with its silver keys, the fox with its seed and soil, the lion who held the final light, and the deer who heard the wind before it spoke. Each had told its dream, not in words, not aloud, but in ways she could carry. The carousel did not turn now. Its music was gone. But in its place came something else. A warmth. A hum, not of instruments, but of knowing. The creatures had told their stories. Now it was her turn. She felt the shift before she understood it. The carousel had never been for riding, not truly. It was not a place to be entertained or hurried through. It was a gathering of stillness, a circle of listening. A mirror, curved in wood and song, meant to show not the past, but the becoming. Ansel stepped to the center of the platform. The creatures did not move, but she felt them with her, their presence gentle and waiting. She closed her eyes. The carousel did not spin. But she turned inward, slowly, and saw herself, a child beneath a blanket of stars, a girl walking between shadows, a hand reaching for light without needing to grasp it. She felt it then, the meaning, soft and quiet. The carousel was not waiting to be remembered. It was waiting for her to remember herself. The sky above the clearing had changed. Not fast, not with fire, but in slow shades of silver. The stars had dimmed, not vanished. They simply stepped back, as if offering the sky to morning. And beneath them, the carousel stood quiet, its figures wrapped once more in stillness. Ansel opened her eyes. She stood in the center of the platform, though she had no memory of moving there. Around her, the swan, the fox, the lion, the deer, all silent, but not asleep. Their presence pressed gently against the air, like breath on a windowpane. Waiting, not for her choice, but for her readiness. The music had not returned. But in her chest, a single note remained. A quiet tone, neither sad nor sweet. Just true. She carried it without effort. The carousel would not spin again, not until another listener came. Its stories were never repeated, only rebreathed. The dreams it gave were shaped to the one who arrived, shaped like water shapes to stone, shaped like lullabies shaped to longing. Ansel stepped down from the platform, her boots finding soft moss and wildflower roots. A faint path opened before her, not visible before now, leading gently out of the clearing, through the last of the listening trees. She turned once, just once. And the carousel gave a final shimmer, not of light, but of stillness. A farewell. No creature moved. But the whole carousel seemed to breathe, "Thank you." Ansel did not wave, or speak, or weep. Instead, she walked. The wind followed softly. And somewhere behind her, the lion's eye closed for the last time that night. The forest beyond the clearing was no longer quite the same. The trees still stood, tall and still, but they leaned differently now, as though they, too, had been listening to the carousel's song. The path beneath Ansel's feet was mossy and soft, but certain. She did not wonder which way to go. Her feet already knew. The sky above lightened in pale ribbons, brushing the canopy in rose-gray. Morning was near, not bright, but promising. She walked without speaking. She did not need to. Around her, the forest gave way slowly, gently. The whisper of leaves became a hush of wings, and the hush of wings faded into birdsong far away, still distant, as though the day was waiting for her to return before it began. She paused once beside a small stream that had not been there before. It trickled across the path with no sound, its surface reflecting not the sky, but the carousel, the swan, the fox, the lion, the deer. Just for a moment. Then the image rippled away. She knelt, touched the water. It was cool, familiar. And in her chest, the soft note she carried did not fade. It pulsed, steady and quiet, like the echo of the music box even after the lid has closed. By the time she reached the last line of trees, the clearing behind her had vanished, as if it had never been, but she knew it remained. Not in place. In time. Waiting only for the next heart that needed to listen. Ansel stepped beyond the edge of the forest and into the gentle light of morning. She did not look back. Not because she had forgotten, but because she hadn't. Some dreams live best in the quiet they leave behind. And she, now, carried that quiet forward. Ansel did not rush. The grass beneath her feet felt soft and clean, kissed with morning dew. A mist still clung to the hollows, glowing faintly in the gold-threaded light. She walked as one not waking, but arriving, as though the world had waited for her return with open arms and a fresh cup of sky. Birdsong began in small bursts. Not loud. Just enough. The kind of music that doesn't ask to be heard, but is there when one is ready. She reached the old fence, the one she'd passed days before, or perhaps just hours. Its wood was still worn. The path still wound gently toward the village. But she, standing beside it now, was not the same girl who had wandered in search of quiet. The carousel lived in her bones. Not in images or words, but in the weightless knowledge of being known. Of having listened long enough for the world to trust her with its quieter truths. She passed through the gate and walked into the soft rhythm of morning. Doors were just beginning to open. Chimneys whispered their first sighs of warmth. A baker tied her apron. A cat blinked from a windowsill. No one asked where Ansel had been. No one needed to. But some turned to her as she passed, drawn not to her face, but to the hush she carried. A stillness, like the pause in a melody just before the final note. Ansel smiled once at a child who looked up from chalk drawings on the road. And in that moment, the carousel turned again. Not in the forest, but in her. Slow and steady, gentle and bright. And far behind the hills, where dreams still linger in the folds of shadow and root, the wind carried the faintest tune across the trees. Waiting. Listening. Always there, at the edge of sleep.